Welcome to the Unlist. Today we're discussing old money fragrances. We're doing a proper unlist where I name fragrances of a theme for you without listing them, without ranking them in any order. No graphics on screen, none of that stuff, right? The whole point of my channel originally was unlisting stuff, and I've done lots of deviations in the past few years. So, old money is kind of I don't want to say popular topic, but it's a topic that I've been made aware of multiple times. Other channels have done videos about old money fragrances, and people have asked me about what do I think smells like old money. So I'm doing a video about it. But before I do that, before I can name old money fragrances, I need to tell you what old money is. Not everybody knows. So old money and new money, really it's simple as it sounds. New money is first generation wealth. Someone who becomes independently rich. You know, they either have a successful career in tech or law or medicine, become a millionaire within their lifetime, right? That's new money. Old money is someone who was born into it. Their parents or their grandparents, usually the grandparents, because parents may not be far enough back unless your dad was really old when he had you and you were like last one out gets the light. But typically old money, it's your grandparents. It's nepotism, basically. Old money is a euphemism for nepotism. So it's your grandparents had money, and then your dad got that money, and now here you are getting that money. So it's dynastic is another way of putting it. It's dynastic wealth. It's wealth that passes down. Centuries ago, people like that would often get political titles. So they would have actual political power, you know, nobles, okay, aristocrats, positions within government, your feudal society, more often than not. These days, they have influence over governments, clearly, but they're not directly a part of them anymore. They're not ennobled, they're not titled, they don't have direct responsibility. They just influence with their money. Like I said, off to the side. But generally it's thought of that old money is more conservative because unlike independently wealthy people who make their fortune in their lifetime, want to show off, you know, put their big boy pants on, I'm better than you, I'm wealthier than you, I'm winning at the game of life and you suck. And so here's the flashy clothes, the big cars, fancy, expensive jewelry, you know, all the crazy stuff that just tends to be tacky or garish to some people. But it's them trying to prove, in the most auspicious way possible, trying to prove why they are superior to everyone else around them because they've got money and you don't. Old money doesn't have to do that because they were born into it. They didn't necessarily earn it. So for them, it's just a resource. It's just there. So old money tends to be a little more pragmatic with their spending. You know, they fine hand-tailored clothes and shoes, handmade jewelry, things that are custom, bespoke. You hear the word bespoke a lot. Exclusive locations, exclusive restaurants, things like that. Experiences and items of value, not just flashy, not just status craving, because they can't crave a status that they were born having, right? You can't crave oxygen when you're breathing air every day of your life. It just doesn't make sense. So old money fragrances have the same aesthetic. They are classy, they are refined, but they don't jump out and grab you and shake you and say, I'm rich, I'm important. You know, they don't jump out and grab you and say, I'm luxurious, I am here to let you know that I smell expensive. They don't do that. They don't need to do that. And they tend to be a little more on the conservative side in their style, since a lot of old money people like old things. Vintage Rolls Royces, vintage Bentleys, classic wool coats, you know, things like that. They buy old estates. They buy they buy homes that look more like castles than like sculptures. Like a lot of look at homes in the Hamptons versus homes in the Hollywood Hills, right? Hollywood Hills, new money. Hamptons, old money. Okay? That's the difference. Celebrities, athletes, new money. Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, old money. Okay? That's the comparison. So I'm going to start things off with probably the most obvious choice of old money fragrances. For me personally. And, well, I think you guys are probably going to agree with me on this. Gosh, just gotta find it first. Okay, here we go. Here it is. So, it is Bois de Portugal from 1987 by Creed. So, this was my favorite niche pick for Mr. Smelly's whole pick one niche, one designer, one cheapo, one blah blah blah. And I've always thought the very first day I smelled this, that this stuff kind of like epitomized old money to me, because when it came out in '87, it was already copying a much older style. So Bois de Portugal draws a line straight back to the early '70s. Fragrances like Pierre Cardin Pour Monsieur, which would have been 15 years by that point, 15 years in the rearview mirror. So to bring out a fragrance that's really inspired by another fragrance from 15 years earlier in the late 80s is, you're definitely trying to say something with that. You're trying to say that you're, reject modernity, embrace tradition, right? What they always say. And it takes that style, that semi-oriental fougere style, and just really classes it up. Has this sort of transparent kind of little bit salty ambergris note infused with the base. Has the sandalwood, the petitgrain, the lavender, okay, the patchouli, the oak moss, the bergamot. It is just very stately, reserved, and while not the most original fragrance, obviously, it is definitely that style executed at a very high level, which would seem, again, like I said, something older, but executed at a high level. It's kind of what old money does. They don't want the newest, flashiest things. They want the proven things, the things that they know are good, but done in a way that's above what everyone else can normally get their hands on. So the traditional leather boots, the traditional wool jackets, but bespoke, custom tailored, made by hand, can be passed down to the next generation, mended and repaired and kept forever, for generations themselves even. Now another selection for old money, it's going to be kind of obvious too. I think a lot of people are going to expect this, is Polo, the original 1977 Polo, or 78. I think 77. Could be wrong. Could be 78. The 78 doesn't really matter. But the day I smelled this for the first time, I also thought old money. This is more like American old money. See, Bois de Portugal can be old money in Europe too, because Pierre Cardin is French. That whole style of semi-oriental fougere is very French style. This is very much, again, the Hamptons. This is Martha's Vineyard. This is New England, okay? Castle Rock, that whole thing. So this is, you've got an estate on a large patch of property surrounded by woods. There's no interstate highway within like 20 miles of you. You have your own kitchen and butler staff and everything, and you have an actual polo yard on your property with horses that you play polo. You know, you probably have all kinds of crazy stuff in a little compound like that. And you have that old school, everything is brass, everything is burnished walnut, everything is gas lamps or faux gas lamps. You know, houndstooth for the missus, tartan patterns for the man, you know, and obviously polo shirts too, and pinstripe business suits, that whole thing. You know, that whole Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, JP Morgan, that's the vibe I'm going for. That's what I think of when I smell this. And those guys don't drive Bentleys, they don't drive Rolls Royces. They usually drive, or at least when this came out in the 70s, they drove Cadillacs, they drove Lincolns, they drove big Chryslers. Today's modern era, they would probably drive BMWs, 7 Series, they would drive S-Class Mercedes, because there really aren't big high-end American cars anymore. And while some of those guys might still have a vintage Cadillac, you know, lying around from the 70s or 60s, an old Eldorado or something, you know, they might have an old Imperial, you know, old Chrysler Imperial, you know, 25-foot long car. They might have that, but these days the modern equivalent to this person would probably have, like I said, 7 Series BMW, probably have an S-Class Mercedes. That's what they're driving. They're not driving the British stuff. And they smoke cigars. They listen to jazz on their $4 million freaking audiophile turntable. You know, all that stuff. That's the kind of guy that wears something like this. So, yep. And what does it smell like? Most important part. Very mossy, very green. Lots of pine notes, lots of herbs. This is kind of like this is like the smell of the polo field itself. You know, not the horses. This is the smell of the field in which the game of polo is played. Best way I can describe this. And then the forest and the trees around. And everybody who I ever smelled growing up who wore something like this was some kind of older businessman, and you could almost just imagine the cigar smoke that would come along with. You smell this on them, and then the cigar in the mouth, so they kind of go in tandem with each other. But yeah, this is definitely old money for me. Next up for me, it's going to be a bit newer, but also very much old money. And it is Pasha de Cartier from 1992. Now this is an older bottle. They don't look like this anymore. They don't have this cap set up anymore, or this gold rim, or this kind of text. And the juice is also not this dark. Modern day Pasha bottles, it's clear juice, it's not frosted glass, it's not yellow like this. This is the old stuff. This is the good stuff. So, real sandalwood in this. Okay, big slug of, lots of oak moss, big heavy hit of oak moss. And the reason why this one reminds me of old money is just the classic fougere smell, like fougere royale, the classic fougere smell, but you're going to reduce the green notes. You're going to cut back on the tonka and the powdery elements, and you're going to beef it up with spices. So think cinnamon, okay, think nutmeg, okay, then add mint in the top. So cut down the bergamot. So the mint and the spices have the hot and cold interplay. And then the big sandalwood and the big oak moss in the base really kind of cream it out, kind of really thicken and beefing it up. So what you end up with is this really rich, round, woody, spicy, but also the green notes, but the woody, spicy mossiness. And it's just not a lick of play in this, not a lick of laughter. I wouldn't necessarily say it's old man either. This could be a younger guy could wear this, but it's just no nonsense. It's a very rich, redolent, spicy fougere. And also, if you're more inclined, you can substitute this for Safari. I don't own a bottle of Safari, but if you have a bottle of Safari from the same year, 1992, you could sub in Safari. I didn't want to do more than one Ralph Lauren fragrance in this video. Like, I did Polo, but for those of you who prefer Safari over this, they're very similar. You could even do the Aubusson Homme, which also came out in 92. All three of them came out at the same time, and they all have very similar structures. So you can make of that what you will, but this is definitely what I would classify as an old money fragrance. Now, we can go back a little further in time, and we can talk about this. Some of you guys were going to say Chanel's going to make an appearance, right, sooner or later. Because Chanel is very popular amongst old money because it's an old brand. And sure enough, Chanel did make this video. But Chanel's first man's fragrance from 1955. So 70 years ago. 70 years ago, this fragrance was the first men's fragrance. And this is the original 1955 formula, not the 1989 one that would come later. The Eau de Toilette Concentré, aka Eau de Parfum. No, this is the original Chypre composition created by Henry Robert. Why is this old money? Well, remember when I said that old money doesn't necessarily like trends, and they also don't like things that get attention, loudness? Well, where do you think the whole concept of discreet and gentlemanly comes from? Do you think discreet and gentlemanly is a new money concept? No. No, it's not. Because all the way back into the Roaring 20s, before the Great Depression happened, all the new money cats, all the Great Gatsby type of guys, right? I mean, they made a movie about it. And there was a book, obviously. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote the book. But those new money cats wanted bigger, louder, muskier. They wore stuff like Mouchoir de Monsieur. Later on, they wore stuff like Caron pour un homme because it was big, sweet, lavender, vanilla, right? That's all new money stuff. Old money doesn't want that. Old money wants discreet. They don't want a bunch of grease in their hair. You know, they're not doing the macassar in their hair. They're not doing the zoot suits like from the 30s and 40s with the big shoulders that come out and the big hats. That's what new money does. New money does that stuff. Big garish colors and all that. Old money wants it buttoned down. They want it discreet. That became the fashion of the 50s, okay? The 50s was a very conservative decade stylistically. The latter half of the 50s got a little bit crazy with the pastel colors and the Hawaiian prints and the big fins on the cars in the late 50s, but most of the 50s was post-war conservatism, and thus that really informed the style, including the men's fragrances. And thus, when Chanel came out with their first one in 55, following on the heels of stuff like Moustache by Rochas and a couple other early men's, releases, they made a very discreet, very gentle, very mild, clean, woody, plush, but not a whole lot else. Instead of bergamot, you get a very soft lemon, very, very soft lemon, paired with petitgrain, lemon and petitgrain. You get geranium in here, The geranium is given a treatment with a little bit of cardamom. So you get geranium and cardamom in here. And then just a little bit of lavender. Not enough. Still more geranium heavy than lavender. It's not a fougere accord exactly. But you get that geranium. You get that cardamom. The petitgrain up top. The soft lemon. Then you move into the base. And that's when you get your oak moss. Your sandalwood. A little bit of tonka. But primarily oak moss, sandalwood, patchouli. Patchouli is a real big player in this fragrance. And it is clean. The petitgrain gives it almost a fancy French milled hotel soap kind of vibe. Or Savon Accord as they would call it. So it is plush, woody, clean, discreet. Some will say that vintage is more powerful, more potent, and maybe after years of evaporation and consolidation, it might seem stronger. But I have had really old vintage samples of this fragrance. I've had some of my friends who've been collecting far longer than I have, and they have things I'll never be able to get my hands on. They've given me decants of really old specimens of a lot of fragrances, including this one. I had some Chanel for Men, which is what they used to call this, Chanel for Men sample. And yeah, it did smell like the top notes were kind of gone. not gonna lie. It felt stronger because the top notes were gone, and when you're spraying it on, you're getting more of that base right away compared to the more modern one, but not really stronger. At the end of the day, this is a discreet fragrance, and it's meant to be. So, thus, it is a perfect old money fragrance. Plush, perfectly serviceable, and this was the only men's fragrance Avon made. I'm sorry, not Avon, Chanel. Where did I get that from? This is the only men's fragrance Chanel made from 1955 until 1981. That's 26 years. So Chanel had just this for 26 years. It's kind of the epitome of old money. They love it when things don't change. That's their whole vibe. It's things that don't change. I hate it when the bottle falls out of the cap. I was putting the bottle back in the shelf, and the bottle fell out of the cap. Luckily, it didn't have far to go, so it didn't break, but that always just spooks the shit out of me whenever that happens. I hate that. So now, probably the newest fragrance on this list. It's kind of hard to have an old money fragrance if the fragrance is not somewhat old, right? So this is going to be the newest fragrance on this list. It's Terre d'Hermes from 2006. Why is this old money? Because even though it's only 20 years old, not quite, one more year it'll be 20 years old, but it was an older type of design even when it came out. Jean-Claude Elena basically took a citrus aromatic chypre, like the Chanel I just showed you, and he made it more transparent using large doses of ISOE Super. He also added a little bit of like an earthiness, a dirty element with his choice of spices, a little bit of cumin in there, and then some modern, futuristic, like flinty, mineralic musk choices, which were very novel back then. Now they're kind of not so novel anymore. But then he wrapped it with grapefruit, cedarwood, patchouli, and what you end up with is a sort of vetiver-ish grapefruit, patchouli, woody fragrance. So you get that nice dirty grapefruit up top, but then when it dries down, it becomes this very just sort of crystalline envelope of wood, patchouli, and vetiver. No sweetness at all. Zero sweetness. And while it does have performance, it's not a very opaque fragrance. It's not a very solid fragrance. It's very transparent. It's meant to waft around you in the air. So that kind of vibes into the old money aesthetic of let's not get a bunch of attention. Let's not be very sweet, very musky. Let's not have shit tons of any one material, right? And even though this does have shit tons of ISOE Super is to perfume what MSG is to Chinese food. It's a flavor enhancer. That's kind of what it does. It aids in projection. So by itself, it has very little smell. So yeah, this is very much the old money aesthetic. It's aromatic, it's woody, it's very dry, very brisk, and it's not super soapy, it's not aquatic, it doesn't have any elements that would really connect with the more common folk mainstream, you know. You won't see any like aquatics or gourmands or anything like that be old money. BR540 will never be old money, okay? Even though Creed Aventus is wildly popular, Creed Aventus will never be old money. At least not for another 50 years. Maybe in like 2130, yeah, or something. If it's still around, it'll be old money by then. But it's just stylistically, it doesn't really jive with what old money represents, really. Not really. Speaking of vetiver, now is the perfect time to go to my next old money fragrance. And you probably saw this from a mile away. So, some of you may be going, oh, it's about time. I was waiting for that one. And it's Guerlain Vetiver from 1961. This is definitely old money because it's just green, grassy, vetiver, nuances of tobacco, okay, nuances of oak moss, or a little bit of smoke in here. Just the full Monty vetiver fragrance. And vetiver is a very classic, traditional, masculine material in perfume. The earliest vetiver fragrances were created basically in tropical climates, but a lot of that, which kind of sniffs on colonialism a little bit, made its way into the West, you know, up through into the Americas from the South, South America, and over in Europe, this stuff would come over on a boat from Haiti and places like that. So eventually, the old money cats got their hands on vetiver. And in a similar way to how Bay Rum was popular, Bay Rum was very popular with common people. Vetiver was very popular with the bougies. So while you and your dad were wearing Bay Rums, his boss and his boss's boss and his boss's father were probably wearing some kind of vetiver water or vetiver treatment. So Guerlain decided to make a proper perfume out of that in 61 and sell it, and here it is. And although older ones exist, Carvin technically did it first, right? But this has become the reference for a reason. And when I smell this, the crispness of this, the woodiness of this, again, it just kind of feels like a guy, a guy stepping out of an old chauffeured saloon or something. You know, he's going to be wearing this. He's not going to be wearing La Malle or 1 Million. He'll be wearing something like this. So, last but not least, some of you may in fact disagree on this, but Yves Saint Laurent, Rive Gauche. Why is this old money and not Azzaro Pour Homme or any other barbershop fragrance I could have put in here? Well, it's just because, again, the refinement. Okay? So, Azzaro Pour Homme was so popular at one point as to be ubiquitous. Okay. Another reason why Dracar Noir didn't make the list. It's another reason why Paco Rabanne didn't make the list. You know, or the unlist, I should say, didn't make the unlist because those were too ubiquitous. This fragrance was never ubiquitous because it was never successful. And you combine that with the fact that this fragrance also takes that barbershop style shave foam fragrance and elevates it with a level of blending, a level of diffusion. Okay, you get big notes of clove in here, patchouli, all right, oak moss, spices. The way this whole thing is orchestrated, it's like, again, it's like a common item made to such a high degree, which is what, again, the old money folks like to take. The plain wool jackets, the plain leather boots, bespoke, hand-tailored, custom-made, finer materials than what the average person can buy, and not manufactured, made by one person in a studio, or a shop somewhere. So this gives you that vibe of that shaving cream, that fougere barbershop smell, but way better blended, much richer, much creamier, just on a level that is above stuff like Azzaro. As much as I love Azzaro, it's like above that, okay? And you could easily substitute Zaharoff Signature Pour Homme for this, even though they're not the same fragrance, okay? Not the same fragrance, but that same blended sort of... And Zaharoff is old money, by the way, so it makes sense. Old money family, old money fragrance. But you could substitute Zaharoff Signature Pour Homme in place of this, because this is discontinued and blah, 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 blah. But that's what I mean. That kind of barbershop fougere, whether we're doing the Zaharoff Signature or we're doing this. But that barbershop fougere, just made on a level of excellence and blending, richness, that is above any of the others. So, you know, this would be like the common man's version right here. Derek, this just smells like literal Barbasol to me, this one does. It's great. I love it. I love it a lot. But it's just like, it's the working class version. And then this is, you know, the owner of the company. That's the employee. Derek is the employee. Reeve Gauche is the owner, or the owner's father, owner's grandfather. And he's owned the business, you know, for several hundred years now. He's the third, fourth generation of his name, whatever. So there you guys have it. Old money fragrances. Thanks for watching.